So tonight, in our series, let's talk about resources for God's purpose. Now, from our last topic, I don't know when was that. When was the last time I taught? What date was that? On a Friday night. 3 weeks ago, right? Yeah, I guess 3 weeks ago. Right. Yeah. So, we talk about Moses' willingness to obey. However, we have to proceed into, because when God tells you to do something, you better, 19. You better ask Him how you're going to do it. Because a lot of people will claim they have a word from the Lord or a task that God gives them. But then when the Lord gives you a task, there has to be some resources that backs it up. Because the moment we lack the resources, then we start giving excuses. Instead of sticking to the plan, to the vision that God gave to us, our focus now became the resources. Instead of seeking God's face, we seek the resources. It's the other way around. So instead of seeking the kingdom of God, we seek the resources. If we cannot see the resources, that's when we back down, or that is when we back off and begin to say, this must not be from God. You remember testimony in us getting the house, Anne was a bit discouraged because the amount of money that we are pre-approved will not be able to buy any house in Edgebrook. So she said, let's just go and look for a place in Jefferson Park. And that is when I told her, well, how am I going to tell God that she is not able to provide, and so we will change location from Edgebrook to Jeff Park. She never heard anybody reason like that. But I said to her, I wasn't condemning her, but I said, you better make sure you want Jeff Park, because I said, I don't want to ask the Lord, I'm sorry, we made a mistake. It's Jeff Park pala. And then if there's no resources, you change your mind again. And then you say, well, we'll move to Navotas, Rizal, in the Philippines, because we cannot afford Jeff Park. And so it woke her up a little bit, because now you see the tremendous amount of money needed to buy a house in Edgebrook. Look at our resources, it doesn't match. And so we downsize, we give up. So your focus is now on the resources instead of God. Now the moment your focus is on the resources instead of God, then you begin to miss the purpose. Purpose is out of the topic already. Now you're just saying purpose for the sake of saying it, not really meaning it. Because now you are moved by needs, not by vision. You are moved by resources, not by purpose. And so, soon Moses will be struck with this, because he killed an Egyptian soldier, buried him, and then he fled for his life. He was very scared. It's been 40 years. So 40 years, Moses is now around 80 years old, okay? Now, don't you think 80 years old is old? Huh? That's old, 80 years old, for God to give you, well, it's not a fresh vision, but for God to give you something to run with at the age of 80. I don't care if it's in the times of Adam and Eve, 80 is 80. That's still a lot of years. And so now God told Moses, well, you have stayed here in Midian for so long, so gave him a vision, and then proceeded to cast the vision once again. And this is when we find a different Moses, because in the first Moses, in the first part of his life, he was able to take action right away. He killed the Egyptian soldier. He tried to mediate the problem between two Israeli brothers. He was a very aggressive young man. But then 40 years lapse is now in the second quarter of his life. So in the second quarter, he has to find out what is it going to be, okay? And he was confronted with his fears. And this is kind of a cycle that most people go through. But we really don't want to pay attention to it, because it could be an admission of guilt in focusing our attention on the resources instead of the purpose. I mean, one way or the other, we are guilty of that. We have lofty dreams for our children. and we could not afford it. We forgot the dreams because we could not afford it. So the focus is on resources, no longer on the purpose. We have these wonderful plans, and then we don't have the resources. We change it. So our purpose keeps being derailed by the lack of resources or the lack of faith to believe God for the resources. Let's read, okay? Exodus chapter 3, verse 11. But Moses asked God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He answered, "I will certainly be with you, and this will be a sign to you that I am the one who sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all worship God at this mountain." So Moses says, "Who am I?" And God simply says, "I'll be with you." Never really answered, "Who am I?" Again, because he was so focused on himself. Another problem that we have, so focused on ourselves. We look at ourselves and we say, how in the world am I going to accomplish this purpose that God put in my heart? And God says, "I'll be with you." Okay? Then Moses asked God, "If I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what should I tell them?" God replied to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God also said to Moses, "Say this to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered in every generation. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, 'The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have paid close attention to you and to what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to you that I will bring you up from the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. They will listen to what you say. Then you, along with the elders of Israel, must go to the king of Egypt and say to him, 'The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now please let us go on a 3-day trip in the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. However, I know that the king of Egypt will not allow you to go even under force from a strong hand. But when I stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles that I will perform in it, after that he will let you go.'" So forewarned about the resistance. "And I will give these people such favor with the Egyptians that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. Each woman will ask her neighbor and any women staying in her house for silver, gold, and gold jewelry, clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters. So you will plunder the Egyptians." Moses answered, "What if they don't believe me? And will not obey me, but say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" The Lord asked him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. "Throw it on the ground," he said. So Moses threw it on the ground. It became a snake, and he ran from it. The Lord told Moses, "Stretch out your hand and grab it by the tail." So he stretched out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. "This will take place," he continues, "so that they will believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." In addition, the Lord said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So he put it inside his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was diseased, resembling snow. "Put your hand back inside your cloak," he said. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, it had again become like the rest of his skin. If they will not believe you and will not respond to the evidence, the first sign, they may believe the evidence of the second sign. And if they don't believe even these 2 signs, or listen to what you say, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground. But Moses replied to the Lord, "Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, either in the past or recently, or since you have been speaking to your servant, because my mouth and my tongue are sluggish." The Lord said to him, "Who placed a mouth on humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. Moses said, please, Lord, send someone else. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and also he is on his way now to meet you. He will rejoice when he sees you. You will speak with him and tell him what to say. I will help both you and him to speak, and will teach you both what to do. He will speak to the people for you. He will serve as a mouth to you, and you will serve as God to him. And take this staff in your hand, and you will perform the signs with. Now I will not do an exegetical study on this one, but I will just go through this quickly, because I would like to put this in the context of resources for the fulfillment of God's purpose. Now, first, let's talk about the revelation of God's purpose. This was revealed to Moses on the previous verses, precisely verses 5 to 10. When God began to argue with Moses and began to say, look, I have listened to the prayer of my people. I've seen their suffering. Now he said, I'm going to deliver them through you. Okay? So that is the vision. I will bring you out of the land of Egypt. Now the purpose is very clear now. Now you're talking about probably between 2 to 3 million people. So that's a mass exodus. Can you imagine the chaos that our southern border gave to us because the amount of illegal immigrants that are coming here? And you look on television, these masses of people, 5,000, 4,000 per day. And it's a lot. Now, these are around 3 million people. Now, you will wonder now, you will not wonder anymore why the Amalekites and the surrounding nations, when they saw these 2 to 3 million people marching from Egypt, they got scared. Because, you know, if they get thirsty and they see one of their lakes, you're not talking about somebody drinking from the lake. They were afraid if they drink from the lake, it will dry up the lake. These 3 million people, you know. If they pass through a field where there are grains and they are hungry, the grains are gone. I mean, a massive harvest. They were scared. What if these people are violent? I mean, what if they are like the people of Gaza, you know, with the Hamas and all of those things? Can you imagine the fear that this ancient Near East people, the Middle Eastern people, have on the nation of Israel? You're talking about 2 to 3 million people marching out of Egypt. Now, you are Moses. How many of you here, you have 10 children in your family? Anybody here with 10 children? No. Some people complain with 1 child or 2 children, you know. You're talking about 2 to 3 million people that you're going to feed. Who's going to feed them? Moses. Did they bring enough food? No. Do they have enough food? No. They were slaves. And surprisingly, what God told Moses was, tell your people, the women, ask for gold and silver jewelries from the women. He didn't say, ask for food. Ask for gold and precious jewelries that you will put on your sons and your daughters. God never told them to ask for food. There was no preparation for supplies. The logistics was bad, you know. And so if you are Moses waking up with that, how in the world am I going to go through this? How are you going to supply that much need? This is when your vision or your purpose has to have the faith for resources. Again, I'm not discounting the fact that all of you here are visionaries, or you have visions, you have plans. I'm not discounting that. The reason why you are here in the U.S. in the first place is you have that. But then, do you have the vision for the resources? I know some of you have wonderful dreams. I mean, phenomenal dreams that even you are impressed when you begin to think about the dreams that you have. But now, do you have the faith for the resources behind those dreams? We found out quickly how quick Moses was in trying to excuse himself from being used by God. It's easy to say, well, I'm going to follow God until God tells you what to do. Brother Willie was recollecting. I don't know if he could recollect it to us here. He was in, what is that? He was not in Dumaguete. uh, in another island, Sikor, where some witches are. And he's out of funds already. And then the Lord spoke to him and said, will you commit to going to Dumaguete for 1 year? Okay. Now, the resources never crossed his mind. But when God told him, go to Dumaguete for 1 year, he was just concerned about, is this God? Am I going to obey God? Well, he figured out it was God. And the kind of miracles that he experienced, the provisions. I mean, he said, I was raped several times in Dumaguete by pastors. He said, some pastors book themselves in the Bethel House, it's a hotel where we stay, and never attend the seminars. And during feeding time, during lunch, they will be there to eat, and then not be in the seminar. He said, there's a lot of people who registered, but during the seminar, there are very few people. And he said, it's very discouraging. But God told him, will you commit to 12 months? And he claimed that became like a springboard for his ministry in Nepal, and then in India, and in other parts of the world that the Lord is sending him. But there is this testing period. Can you believe God for resources? Now, think about it. If you have a big dream, what dreams are you working on right now? For example, if you want to become an engineer, that's the goal, to become an engineer. You're in high school right now. So you are trying to meet the needs of a high school student. Can you imagine if you cannot pass high school? Or you cannot believe God for resources in high school? How are you going to believe God for resources in being an engineer? So God will take you along little by little. He will not ask you to do gigantic moves right away. Although from time to time we see it in the scriptures on rare occasions. I mean, I started with tithing, you know. I figured out I could not fulfill any vows I make. I will have New Year's resolution. 1 hour later, I'm already violating it. So I thought if I drop some offering in the offering bucket, I will not be able to take it back. So I'll just close my eyes and put it in. That's the first thing I was able to fulfill. Started with that, you see. And then the Lord will begin to impress upon your heart a few other things. If you are not faithful in these things, you will not be able to progress, you see. Now, because you're being challenged with resources. So, Moses began to see the enormity of the vision, so he began to make some excuses. Say excuses. Say it again. Anybody here making excuses before the Lord? I'm not looking at you, okay? Now, normally I was out of the Philippines for 8 years before I was able to return. Oh, that was heartbreaking when my father died because I could not go back home. I mean, my papers were not okay. So I was longing to go back to the Philippines. I don't like the weather in the U.S. Virginia was not that cold, but I really like tropical weather. I've been here in Chicago for, how long have you been here? Ann, where's Ann? How long have you been here? 33 years. We have been here in Chicago for 33 years. I still hate the weather. You know, my wife says, we have a very mild winter. I agree. But during winter, I don't want to leave the house. Yeah. I prefer tropical weather. I don't like a lot of sweat, but I prefer sweating over chilling. Okay? So I really miss the Philippines. And when I went back to the Philippines, some of my visions were rekindled. Yeah. So that was over 20 years ago when we started doing missions. I really want to go back to the Philippines right away. Yeah, my wife doesn't like it. Until his dad died. And when he died, I told him, I really want to go back to the Philippines. That was the first time she opened up and said, okay, I'm open to going back to the Philippines. I like the Philippines, you know. So can you imagine Moses after 40 years not being with his people? Now remember, he did not go to Canaan. He went to Midian. It will be at the bottom. And so he's now going back to Egypt. Egypt is where his people are. So that is still his home. He was not excited at all. Now, 40 years ago, will you look the same? Have you looked at your pictures from 40 years ago? Well, not all of you can. But I have photographs from 30, maybe 40 years ago. I don't know. Pastor Gene, who looked at my photographs, I was very skinny. And he said, you look like a refugee, you know. My kids, when they first saw my old pictures, they look at it and say, is this you, Papa? You know. DJ called me Afro-Pino because my hair was kind of thick, you know. But at the first glance of that picture, if you don't know me and you have not seen, you will not recognize me right away. You know, very different, including the size. Now, Moses was out of sight 40 years ago, but he was still very conscious. He was still afraid. He started the enormity of the task. By the way, when God gives you a vision, it's beyond your abilities, always. Always. God will never ask you to do something. There will be stepping stones, but when God asks you to do something, it will always be beyond your abilities. Because that beyond your abilities thing is what gives room for miracles. It's what, if your vision is too small, then you don't need God, you will not pray. But the vision will be so big. And can you imagine this project we are taking on right now? We're going to buy a house worth, after we pay all the taxes, it will be around 27, 28 billion pesos. That's a lot of money, even by US standards. That's a lot of money. Now, 40 years ago, when I was still in the Philippines, have I ever thought of buying a property that much? But we did. We're going to do it. And we have paid off this building. This is a lot more than that, you see. This is our second building. But the resources were there, but you have to take action. And so it's beyond me, because I grew up in the squatters. It's beyond me. For some of you grew up rich, you may say, well, that's easy. Not for me. It's just beyond my abilities. It's got to be beyond your abilities. Now, there will be stepping stones that God will train you with, but ultimately the vision is so big, it has to be from God. So after God's purpose was revealed to him, Moses used 5 excuses for wanting to back out. These are the same excuses that we give, so I want to go through it with you. Now, again, my question is, have you ever given God excuses? And that is a simple question, but that is actually a very tough question. Have you known God's will for your life, or have you known his vision? And have you ever made excuses? You know, in a couple of months, when is it, John? Is it going to be June, right? Yeah. Now, Israel is fresh from, well, it's not over yet, the Hamas war. There's still shellings taking place. But an opening was given to John, probably full scholarship, if he will give me back the money, if he gets it. But probably full scholarship. But Hebrew University has opened a scholarship, less than half of the tuition. Yeah. For a 6-week study, right? 6-week study. When he was telling me this, I immediately told him, go ahead, enroll. You know why? Because he's not married yet. And so, because I want him to be able to teach the Bible well, and he wants to do the same thing, you cannot strut and say, where are we going to get the money? You just have to know this, you're called, this is what you need to do, and go for it. And then after he applied, he was sent a letter that if he do certain things, they will give him money that is more than what he will be paying the university for. Now, he would not have found out that a scholarship is possible had he not submitted his application. Now, some people will look at that and say, wow, this is several $1,000s. It's not for me. Then your focus is on the resources, not on the purpose. But because his focus is on the purpose, Now the resources are lining up. If he fulfills what the university wants him, he will have more than what he will pay the school with. That's God's resources. But if you are a cowardly soul, and you will look at the enormity of this task that God gave to you, and you begin to say no right away, then you will never know why it is to be provided for by the Lord. Now remember, it's the same John, it's the same allowance, it's the same household resources, but we keep taking on tasks that are beyond our abilities, and the Lord has been good enough and gracious enough to continue to amaze us with this vision. By the way, keep Bishop Cabrera in prayer. I think they are renting a restaurant now because a room in their building burnt, you know. And so I emailed him, and because we're going to help him. Why? He's a brother that needs help. But we keep taking on these things. And I found out that the Lord keeps giving us resources that we need. But then again, it will not prevent us from making excuses, because that's our nature. We make excuses. If we will not make excuses, we will accomplish a lot. Okay, first excuse. Basically, verse 11, he said, "Who am I that I should be given this task?" What is that excuse? I am not an important man. Or, if you want to be gender sensitive, I am not an important woman, you know, but that's too much for me. So I am not an important man. Yeah. Who am I that I should be given this task? That's my interpretation of the passage. Again, at this time, Moses was already 80 years old, and he has been a shepherd for 40 years. A prince for 40 years, now a shepherd for 40 years. How in the world am I going to go in front of a Pharaoh? Pharaoh will be the obstacle. Pharaoh will be the resistance to your vision. Okay? It'll be the resistance. And every time you set out to fulfill God's will for your life, you will find a Pharaoh. You will find a resistance. And this is so big that Egypt was the most powerful empire in the world during that time. And so he was looking at that, and he says, how in the world am I? I ran because two Israelis, fellow men, challenged me, are you going to be unjust to us? Are you going to kill us and bury us like you killed the Egyptian? He was a prince. He could kill anybody, basically, during that time. But he was very scared. Very scared. Now remember, those are slaves. If Sira Ulo ni Moses could have killed those two slaves, and nobody will miss them. He will not be called into account by the courts of Pharaoh. But Pharaoh is a totally different animal right there. Too big. What will be the answer to that? And God says this, I will be with you. Because Moses needs to learn that the moment you are smitten with a sense of unimportance, and this is, by the way, what you call as insecurity sometimes. When you have the sense of unimportance. I mean, the little parts of our body will never complain. Your pinky little finger will not say, well, I'm too little. I might as well detach myself from the hand. No, every part of our body has a value. But when insecurity hits you, you begin to have this sense of unimportance. You know, when people say, well, I'm not that good anyway, sometimes it's a sign of false humility and not humility at all. Because whatever task God gives to you, that is important in His eyes. But now when Moses begins to say, who am I? That is, I am not an important person. Moses needs to learn that when God assigns, He also enables and empowers. Now, the lesson that we can learn from here is this. Sufficiency to fulfill your purpose is not from your own. It is from the Lord Himself. Yeah. You will never be sufficient. If your talent is good enough for your task, it's not from God. Yeah. If you have enough money to fulfill God's purpose, it's not for you. Okay? If you have enough talent to fulfill God's purpose, that's not the call. because God cannot display His sufficiency. However, what we have to understand is this. To fulfill your purpose from God, it's not your self-sufficiency. A lot of us wanted so bad to be self-sufficient. A big church in Maui, Hawaii. You know the pastor? What Kinsey told me was this. They have prepared a trust fund, encouraging each pastor to have a trust fund. That trust fund will look like an endowment. So they don't have to believe God for resources. They can just live off of the interest. You know the big churches, like there's a cathedral, I think two Catholic cathedrals in downtown Chicago. One beautiful Methodist cathedral in downtown. And then you have Moody campus. It is huge. I don't know if it will cost at least $1 billion in property value. And then you have the Presbyterian Church by Buckingham Fountain. Beautiful buildings, very expensive buildings. You know how they are surviving? They're not surviving by the offerings. It's not enough. They are surviving by the endowments. Endowment will be like this. Like there's a Presbyterian church in Evanston, and there's almost no member there. But they have an endowment for the senior pastor, endowment for the building, and endowment for a youth pastor. So the youth is something like 2 or 3 kids, but they have a pastor that they're paying over $100,000 per year. Because the cost of living in Evanston, and then the insurance and everything else. So they are shelling out $120,000 at least per year on a youth pastor with around 2 members. So I begin to ask, how do they do that? I said, endowment. There's a $5 million endowment on the youth pastor. So that $5 million endowment, the capital doesn't get touched. If the interest, if it earns more, it compounds. And so they are living off of the endowment, just the interest. There is a building endowment that building has, I think, for $20 million. So they don't have to worry about the upkeep of the building. They are able to maintain it through the endowment. And so that becomes the wisdom of man. And that's why in the Philippines we have a term, sigurista. Yeah. And by the way, that's how some of us behave. We say, well, if I earn this much money, then I will serve God. Believe me, you will earn that much money, and you will find out that as you earn that much money, you will spend a lot more money. Yeah. Filipino coach, Chinese name, Yan Giao, I think is the coach. I was reading his interview. He said his problem with his basketball players in the Philippines, like the NBA players here, he said his problem is somebody signed a fat contract, Philippine Basketball Association, PBA. He said somebody signed a fat contract, say $1 million peso per year. An average player, say for example, an average player makes, let's put it in the peso term, say 500,000 pesos per month. He said, these people, 500,000 pesos per month, they buy a luxury car. See, the luxury cars are around 3 million pesos. So you tie up your money, you know, and everything else. So he said, you are making 500,000 pesos, but you're spending 700,000 pesos. So what does it mean? Now, on the outside, you look good, right? But you are 200,000 pesos poorer. If a poor man is making 100 pesos, but he spends 40 pesos, he's actually 60 pesos richer than you are. And when I saw that logic, I said, whoa, that's a different perspective. You see? That's why Filipinos, we have this attitude of sigurista. But not with God. Because God can tell you to do things that are very ridiculous, only to prepare you for something else. I think we become too smart. We are now weighing our obedience to God based on what we have, not based on faith or what God's vision is. And so God says, well, the key to that, if you think you are unimportant, is I'll be with you. The second excuse. So, in that first excuse, I'm not an important person. How many of you here, don't raise your hand, have given God that excuse? I'm nobody. I will not be able to do anything. You gave that excuse. If you give that excuse, that's like Moses. Second, I don't know what name to give you, of you in front of the people. Now, the Jews during that time is already in so much idolatry. Okay? Evangelists likes going to the Philippines. They like going to China. They like going to India. They like going to Africa. Why? Philippines, India, Africa. When you go there and you give an altar call, very easy. Who among you here wants to believe in Jesus? People will raise their hand. You know why? Because Jesus is just one of the gods. They have a million gods. So an additional God will be easy. So no problem. But here, what name will I give you? And that is when God says, I am who I am. He did not give the name Jehovah Rapha. In our series on healing, Rapha is a common name for healers, physicians, and all of those healers in their community. But they have battle gods, they have provision gods, they have harvest God, they have fertility gods. They have all kinds of gods. They have gods during the night, gods during the day. They have festivity gods. And so, who are you? If Moses was asked by the Israelis, who is this God? He is your deliverer. Then the Israelites will say, we already have a God like that. We already have it. We have a deliverer God. If Moses says, well, God is the one who will give you food. And they'll say, well, we already have that God. We have a food God. Well, God is the one who will give you wine. And they'll say, well, we have a wine God. In fact, not only do they have wine gods, they have found in archaeology they have beer gods that they worship for the picture that they saw were barley grains for making beer. They have beer gods. So who is this God? God gave a unique name. I am who I am. I will be what I will be. Meaning whatever needs you have, that I am. That means you don't need to worship other gods. Just need to worship me because I'm the only one. Now that is the second challenge. What God will I present? By the way, when God tasks you with doing something, who is the God that you present? I was buying the gorilla hoop that James wants in the suburbs, and the old man selling the hoop for $100 asked me, what do you do? I said, I'm a pastor. And he scoffed at me because I'm a pastor. You see, he doesn't like that. Now the same thing. Who is the God that you present to the people? Now, can you imagine if, well, some people have already surrendered to it, hey, let's do something this Sunday. I'll give you times and a half for your payment. What do we normally say? Sure, let's do it. You just presented a God who cannot match times and a half. Well, God guarantees already not times and a half, but double. You will make, by the way, not double, but on the sixth day you will make double, so you don't have to earn it on the rest day. But that is the God. However we present ourselves, we are presenting our God. So, say you have a vision. God told me I'm going to do this, or this is my purpose. And somebody challenge you and say, by the way, my pastor told me this when I set out to come here to study because I don't have sponsors. He told me this. He said, Jose, you will not make it in America without me. That's what he said. He said, I could not believe my ears, but he said, you will not make it in America without me. The moment he said that, what went through my mind was this: your name is not Jesus. That immediately went to my mind. But other people will tell that to us, you will not make it without me. And we believe them. That means the size of our God is the size of that person. That's it. That's how small our God is. That's why when Moses was asking God, what name will I give them? He was saying, Lord, they already have all kinds of gods. So what name will I give them? He gave the name, I am who I am. That's the second excuse. How are you going to witness to a millionaire? You know, the trouble that people have with Trump is because politicians want money. Well, he's a billionaire. Politicians wants to become famous. Well, he's already famous. He's got a top television program. He used to own the Miss Universe beauty pageant. People wants to be looking good. He's already handsome. He's got it all, they say. So how are you going to lure that guy to just follow everybody? You cannot. So he's untamed. They cannot rule him because you cannot lure him with money, with fame, with good looks. He has it all. You know. And that's our intimidation, by the way. Some of us will immediately bow out if an educated person is in front of us. We don't know how to tap into the wisdom of God. Some of us will immediately be scared if a rich person is. By the way, I saw this here in our church. If a person who looks rich walks in, I can tell the different attitudes that sometimes our ushers and greeters have. Yeah, and that is sad. Or some of our members have. Well, because somebody looks like a millionaire or you think he is rich, then suddenly we treat them extra special. That means that's the size of our God, you see. And this is a challenge to all of us. What kind of God are you going to present to the people? Third challenge, the people's unbelief. That's in chapter 4, verse 1. Now, this is a common excuse leaders give to God, the lack of faith on the part of the people they lead or minister to. That's fear of others. Some people really think that the success of their vision depends on the community. Now, by the way, we have a small church, if you will notice that. We are still doing missions. Yeah. One of my students came here before, and he asked me, he was in this building, he asked me, Brother Jose, how's big is your church? I said, well, we have around 200 people. And he looked at this building and says, no, you don't. He said, you have 500. I said, no, we really have 200. No, you don't. You have 500. Because they evangelistically count their membership. But the beautiful thing is this, yes, we are small, but we are doing a lot. We're doing missions. We're doing our best, you see. Now this is, because your faith is growing, but mind you, we start doing missions funds when the church could not even give me decent allowance. From the very first Sunday that we have a service as Lions Heart, 10% of whatever proceed went to missions. Yeah. I could not even send a team yet. So I will just help missionaries. But we did it right away. Yeah. And then the first mission the scouting mission that we have, I don't have papers yet, you know. So I sent a couple of individuals to go there and do a scouting mission. It was not the first mission, it was just a scouting. It's like, you cannot tell me they conquered the promised land because Moses sent 12 spies. That's what I did. I sent something like spies, you know. And boy, we helped a pastor. We paid his salary for 2 years. That's all we can do. Yeah. Well, because during the time, I think if you give $200 per month, during that time, it's a big salary already for pastors. So I told one pastor, I said, I'll take care of your salary for 2 years. Yeah. And so I paid his salary for 2 years. And that's how we began, you see. But we were always doing something. Now, I never made excuses on the unbelief or the lack of action on the part of the congregation. Yeah. We have people like that. Our church right now is more mature. We have more people giving. I mean, even in this building in the Philippines, I was so blessed. My wife was telling me, oh, sweetheart, she said, there's a couple of people who gave a few $1,000s for the building. That is so impressive, you know. We are learning how to carry the burden of the ministry as a team. I don't have that before. Yeah. But even if I don't have that before, I have more givers now. Even if I don't have that before, we just keep moving. You cannot use the unbelief of the people around you as an excuse. Well, my kids won't follow me, my wife won't follow me. Well, we're not talking about them following God, we're talking about you following God. How are you going to be following God in spite of all of those challenges? Some of us are how do you call that? We are obstructed simply because of my husband, simply because of my wife, simply because of my kids. What happened? Our excuse is the faithfulness of our people. You cannot do that. Yeah. You cannot do that. Now remember, my friends, even my pastor, turned their backs on me when I came here. There was Anne has a relative who was giving me a job. The moment I landed in Hawaii, she told Anne, there is no job. I was already in the U.S. and there is no job. But I did not back up. You cannot use as an excuse the unfaithfulness of others. You cannot do that. Okay? There were 10 people that when I started this church promised me, we'll pay our tithes and so you'll be okay. Around 2 people gave their offering for 2 months, and that's about it. I was basically on my own. Now, can you imagine when I was basically on my own, the first thing I did is rent a storefront, not 1, but 3. So almost all of the offerings are going to the storefront and the rental of my apartment. That's it. You just keep plowing along. But you cannot say, well, the people are unfaithful yet. Right now, our tithing percentage is around 67%. But most churches will be below 20%. But you cannot use the unfaithfulness of the people around you as an excuse. Because faith finds a way. You know, when I started serving God, my parents don't agree with me. Even my kuya don't agree with me. Even my pastor in Navotas don't agree with me. He preached against me that Sunday, my last Sunday service there. When I came here, my senior pastor in the Philippines, the American, don't believe me. But you cannot rely on the unfaithfulness of the people to be the determinant whether you follow God or not. Your faith in God is your faith in God, not the faith of others in God. That's why when this church was really going through the turbulent times, that is when I told Anne, why don't you find a job with the airlines? And she agreed. Why? So I'll have ticket going to the Philippines and elsewhere for missions. That's all. That's all I was thinking. I'm going to keep going for missions. So, but I didn't say, well, the church is like this, I'm going to stop it now for a while. No, that's not going to stop me, because you don't base your decision on the unfaithfulness of those around you. You put your faith in God, no matter what. Number 4. Well, in verse 10 of chapter 4, I am unskillful. I'm rushing a little bit, okay, so we can go home. I am unskillful. No one sets out to fulfill God's purpose with all the skills and education that he needs. Moses says, I'm not an eloquent speaker. Well, God says, I give man his mouth. I forgot who is that evangelist. I think the name is Rover or something. He was in the Vietnam theater, and he was on the PT boat, and somebody threw a grenade in the PT boat. Now, he has other men with him, so he jumped on the grenade. He could have died. But instead of dying, he smashed his face, and he was ugly, and he could barely talk, went through a lot of surgeries. And he's already a believer. So he was shipped back to the U.S. for a lot of surgeries. His fiancée visited him. And he was very sure. I mean, if you look at an ugly man that is almost dying or almost dead, he was thinking my fiancé will break off our engagement. Instead, his fiancé, who's also a believer, leaned on him, and he said, she looked at the ugliest part of his face. Upon seeing the ugliest part, he said, she kissed him on that part and says, we're still getting married. And now he's an evangelist with an ugly face, all scarred. You see, what happened there? I mean, it's not your skill. He could barely talk. Who's this singer? The last time I heard him, his voice, there is already a speaker here because he's got a cancer in the throat that he overcame. When he talks like this. That's how he preach. Yeah, that's how he preach. But that skill, the moment he talks, he used to be a singer. The moment he talks, he's got the audience at the edge of their seat. Perhaps because they could not understand him, and they're just, what is he talking about? But too many of us makes too many excuses. I'm uneducated, or I have less money, or I have less skills. No, that's not an excuse. God gives the skills. Look at, by the way, he grew. Look at chapter 7, verse 22 of Acts. This is Paul talking. So Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptian and was powerful in speech and actions. So he grew into it. Later on, he doesn't need Aaron anymore to teach. And you will not find Aaron speaking for him all the time. Later on, Moses can teach for the whole day. He started with stammering lips. And yet God is the one who gives man the ability to talk. And his talent just grew exponentially. But the last excuse that I will give, that most people give, is in verse 13 of chapter 4, unwillingness. Now, after God did all of those miracles, those signs that we read, finally, Moses said, send somebody else. That is just rude. Okay? It's just like somebody wants you to do something, or your parents want you to do something, and you say, Mom, Dad, I don't have the money to buy that. Oh, I'll give you the card. Well, Mom, Dad, I cannot do the following things. Well, I'll help you with this one. I can't drive. I'll give you a driver. And after he answered all of your complaints, then he says, send somebody else. That's just rude. Now listen to this. In all these years that you and I have been together, and we're serving God together, and we have seen a lot of ups and downs, we have trials and tribulations and joys. After all of this, when God tells you to do something and you say, get somebody else to do it, that is just crush, that is just rude. Okay? It's just like, if I tell my kids, go to the grocery and buy the following things, and they say, no, I can't, and then one of their friends call them and they jump, that is just rude. Because you are being given all the provisions, you're being given all the supports, and then you say no. Now God sent Jesus, God sent the Holy Spirit, God sent His Word, we have experienced His provisions, we have experienced His miracles, and then we say no. That is just rude. And by the way, at that point, Moses was angry. God was angry. By the way, he continued this kind of behavior at one time. God wants to kill Moses. That's the emotion of God, because I have given you everything. And you still give me the excuse, send somebody else, and you're unwilling. You know, God puts men before us. I look at Brother Willie, the struggles there, the bankruptcy he went through. And in all of that, he just keeps giving, just keeps going. I mean, he's braver than I am. He's been dragging me for years to go to India. I said, no. You know, he said, let's go to Bhutan. He said, Brother Willie, I have actually a standing invitation to Bhutan. One of my friends and classmate is a pastor there. I said, no. You know, all I can think the smell of the Indians, you know, and dirt that he's talking about. But that guy goes everywhere. He goes everywhere. And he's a very busy executive. You know how many companies he's a president of? You know how many board he's a chairman of? I mean, sometimes I look, how in the world do you do that? And yet he still have time for all of this. That's willingness. And sometimes when we say we are busy doing nonsense. You know, like you tell your kids, I'm busy. Look at them. They're looking at their video games, playing. They can't do the dishes. They can't do the homework. And they're watching TV. You see? All excuses. What it is called unwillingness. Well, these are the 5 excuses. Let's not give excuses to God. Amen? When God gives you a purpose, He gives you the resources. And by the way, now you're seeing it. I've been talking about having a building in the Philippines. Oh, it's unfolding right before our eyes. Amen? Hallelujah. Let's all stand. Praise God.